On this episode of Dskate presents Gametime, we sit down with Dessi Zaharieva. Dessi is a world-class athlete and diabetes and exercise PhD researcher who lives with type 1 diabetes. Enjoy! Welcome to Dskate Gametime interview series featuring myself, Anissa Gamble. Our goal at Dskate is to promote diabetes awareness within the athletic community throughout a series of interviews. And today we're going to talk to Dessi Zaharieva.
Hi everyone, my name is Dessi Zaharieva. I have had diabetes for 23 years. I do research in type 1 diabetes and exercise. And today I'm currently living in San Francisco and I work at Stanford University.
Great. Thank you. Thanks and welcome. So for our first period today, we're going to talk about your experiences of living with type 1 diabetes. So my first question for you is, when and how were you first diagnosed with type 1 diabetes?
I was first diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 7. And essentially during that time, there was a lot of transition for my family. We moved from a different country. So we came here from Bulgaria, and here being Canada, actually. So we moved to Canada, and then a couple of years later, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And how that kind of went about was, I was always really active. So it took a little bit longer probably for my family to realize, because I was having a weight loss, and then it became a drastic weight loss and frequent urination and kind of the stereotypical symptoms that you hear about, polyuria, polydipsia, all the things you read about and you hear about. So my parents got my blood work done, and then it was kind of quickly get me to the hospital.
That's so common for so many people with weight loss and extreme urination. I guess you were really young, but do you have your parents ever talked about what it was like, just immigrating to Canada and then having their kid be diagnosed diabetes in a healthcare system that is completely different language?
Yeah, definitely. So that was a really, really stressful time for my family. I don't want to say it was really that stressful for me because I didn't really know what was going on. It was kind of a shock to my body and my system. I was just being poked and prodded at the hospital and trying to figure out what was going on. I think my family was just as shocked, trying to understand what was happening to me. And so it was a really stressful time, not having friends and family. So not having anyone to even take care of my brother at that time, who's 4 years older than me. That was an added stress on top of it. So, my parents were kind of separating, one being at home, one being at the hospital. And back then we stayed in the hospital for a lot longer. So I was in the hospital for almost a week and, a lot of tests being done. So it was a really stressful time. I remember trying to translate to my parents, explain certain things and all the doctor jargon and what they were saying to me. And I was only, in grade 3 type thing. So I was really young, and it was hard enough for me to understand what they were saying. And you're not going to find a Bulgarian translator in Canada at the hospital. So I had to be that person for my parents for a little while.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. How has your diabetes standard of care transformed throughout your life?
Yeah. So standard of care is like constantly evolving. If I think back that many years ago, I think we always laugh because we say, back in my day, when I checked my blood sugar, I felt like I had to chop off a finger to get enough blood, and it took 5 minutes to get a reading. And then sometimes you would just get an error, and you're 7 years old trying to get, the proper amount of blood and test properly, and still it didn't work all the time, and having to code each strip. Like, things were very different back in the day. And, fast forward now, standard of care has changed so much. We've seen advancements in, insulin pump technology, even just syringes and the way that they were back in the day versus how they are today, so much smaller. And it's just, everything's changed. So CGM now, continuous glucose monitoring, isn't nearly, as burdensome or hard to understand as it was back in the day. So there's been a lot of transitions in standard of care. And I think all of it has kind of made, management of diabetes a little bit easier.
Yeah, especially now with things that are going on, even with like telemedicine, like that is even something so different and novel today. So yeah, I get always jealous too of like saying, I had to like prick my finger with this massive poker, and then now you could just look at a phone. Like, I wish I had that as a kid, but I'm really happy. Yeah, I'm really happy the technology exists now.
Me too.
What are some aspects of your diabetes that you wish that other people would understand?
This is a good question because, there's a lot of misconceptions about diabetes still. I want to say that this was present 23 years ago and longer, and it's still present in 2020, and probably will still be present in the future. Hopefully we start reducing and eliminating some of those, misconceptions. But I think it takes a lot of education. We can't get mad because sometimes people just don't know. They're not educated in that area. And think about, there's so many conditions we don't know a lot about, and we might make misconceptions as well. So I guess one of the biggest misconceptions is, obviously, I think we hear it all the time, that you ate too much sugar and, that's how you got diabetes. And I remember in grade 3 when that happened to me, and going back to school around Halloween, and everybody saying that, that's how I got diabetes, because during Halloween, I ate too much candy. And so these are all misconceptions. I was a super active and super healthy kid. My parents from Bulgaria, they were pretty strict on me. We didn't have junk food in the house. So, it was kind of hard to just hear those things all the time and kind of be bullied about it and realize that that's not actually the case. And then in grade 3, I couldn't really justify it. I just had to say, like, it's not true, so it's hard for kids sometimes to be able to expand on, why that's not the case. But I think we just need to keep pushing forward and increase our education for people.
Yeah, I still get that of even at my age, it's like you ate too much sugar, and it's such a misconception that even hopefully, just listening to that from someone else will help clarify that there is 2 different types, and it's not because we ate too much sugar. So thank you.
Totally.
Welcome back to Dskate Game Time with today's guest, Dessi. In this period, we're going to talk about her athletic career. So how and why did you get involved in sport?
So I got involved in sport at a really young age. I basically played sports growing up, and all different sports. My parents signed me up for a lot of different things. I tried dance. I did martial arts and still do martial arts. And I played pretty much every sport in school. So from volleyball, basketball, rugby, I tried to play everything I could and signed up for as many activities as I could. So started off, very young playing sports. And that was just kind of built in with how my family raised us. My brother, who was 4 years older, he played sports. And so I always wanted to be like my older brother. And so I played sports too. I just wanted to follow in his footsteps.
You're being pretty humble, in my opinion, because your career is very impressive and inspiring. Can you kindly tell everyone the level of fighting that you've accomplished?
Definitely. Thank you. I did compete at a really high level, and still, during the times of COVID, I'm not competing at the moment, but look forward to getting back to the mats and being able to compete. But I started at a recreational level. So, as a kid, I was just doing martial arts for fun, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think a lot of people do it for fun or just a way to stay fit and stay healthy. And that's how it started off for me. I wasn't very good, by no means was I a natural born fighter. And so started Taekwondo at a really young age, actually the same year I was diagnosed. So when I was 7, and then eventually just progressed from recreational to enjoying it a lot more and doing more competitions, and then competing and qualifying, provincial level, and then international. And I was competing, both nationally, internationally, and represented Team Canada for a number of years for Taekwondo.
And you were a bronze medalist for World Champion. Like, incredible. It's so cool.
Thank you. Yeah, that was definitely that was a big moment in my life to be at that level and at that stage and medaling for our country.
So when you were competing internationally and nationally, what did a normal training day look like for you? And kind of, can you give a gist of what your diabetes would entail?
Yeah, so it's probably different than most sports. And, regular training days are different for everyone depending on their sport. But there's always kind of like the added challenge. I think it depends, what was I prepping for? Was I getting ready for, the World Championships? At that point, I was, training up to 6 hours a day at times and, doing 3 training sessions a day. So that was pretty common. But when I was competing kind of more locally and, regional or provincial, it wasn't really as much training. We did it so often. And in Taekwondo, we trained pretty regularly, pretty much every day. Sundays are always rest days. And a typical day would just be, I would get up, probably go to school because I was still a student at that time. And then just getting ready for the competition would mean, one, it would mean I have to weigh in. So one of the biggest things is like a typical training day, I can't just be eating what I want to be eating. I had to eat a very structured diet. having to cut carbs and kind of lower my calorie intake. And then also think about my diabetes at that time too. So trying to make sure I balanced everything. And a lot of my time was spent at training. And actually a lot of time when I wasn't physically training, we were still doing mental training. And so it kind of never ended. It was like Taekwondo just took over for me. It was either I was at school during my typical day and then I would go train in the evenings, or it would be on the weekends when we would just train most of the day. And then again, Sundays would just be our days off.
Wow. That's incredible that you balanced that. I know sometimes we joked at university while I was playing hockey that we're athlete students instead of student athletes, just because your sport, like that's what you evolve around, and you manage your diabetes around it. So that's pretty amazing that you did that. I think like being a female in sport is kind of difficult at times. So can you like give me a little lowdown of what it was like to be a female within Taekwondo?
Yeah. So, I think one of the biggest things is back in my day, when I first started, training Taekwondo, there were very few females. I want to say that that's changed now, 23 or so years later, there's more females on the mats and on, in the gym training. But by no means are there as many, females as there are males. So most of my training partners are males and kind of push me to be a better athlete. Actually, they push me harder. They're usually stronger than me and bigger than me. So that's really helped me. But at the same time, that was really challenging growing up, having so many males on the mats and in training, because they would push you so hard and not realize sometimes, you just can't keep up. And I would do my best. I'm super competitive, as you can tell. And so you just try to keep up as best as you can. And I think that really helped me be a lot stronger. And people have always kind of told me that at competitions. I hear it all the time. Wow, you're really strong, compared to most females, probably because I always kind of, was raised and grew up around, males that pushed me to my max. And, so that was always, I had to kind of respect that too, because it did push me a lot, but at the same time was a big challenge and kind of breaks you down at the same time. So yeah, there were moments of wanting to quit too, but I think we all face that with any sport. If it gets too tough, we want to kind of back off.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally didn't play girls hockey until I was 15, and I had to move across the country because there was no female hockey leagues where I grew up, and it's definitely lonesome. I most of my games were spent dressing in the janitor's closet, and
oh wow,
fun. But yeah, it's you're definitely a better athlete from it, but it is a very hard some road. So kudos for you. Yeah. So even with that, I told you before, you were actually the first female athlete I have ever seen that had type 1 diabetes, and it was through a commercial. It was like this fighting commercial with Max Toby, and I was like, who is this person? And with that, like, there's not many female type 1 diabetic athletes that you can see. So with you yourself, did you know any male or female type 1 athletes growing up?
Well, thank you for that. That's really kind. Honestly, I look up to you in so many ways, in so many respects, because hockey to me is the most difficult sport. If I look back at one sport that I wish I played growing up, I did say I played a lot of sports. Hockey was one that I did not play, and I regret it. So, we've all got a little bit that we can learn from each other. So I got to learn how to skate next. But so I think for me, one of the biggest things, again, being a female athlete, I was kind of on my own. I felt like not only in the diabetes setting, in the athlete setting as well, I was already kind of secluded in that I didn't know many female athletes, but now with type 1 diabetes, that was even less likely for me. I grew up not attending any kind of camp. I just didn't really want to be part of a camp. And, everyone's different. Looking back, I wish I did attend more camps, because then I would have met other people with diabetes. And now a lot of my friends have attended, diabetes camps and have known each other for so many years. And I feel like I kind of missed out. But when I was a kid, I was so busy, doing my sports that I didn't really have time for camp. So at that, I didn't get to meet anyone with diabetes really until I was much older. I would go to my clinic and see other people with diabetes, but I never really, really met and, got close with anyone with type 1 diabetes until I was about 17. And my mom introduced me to Chris Jarvis, who's actually one of my best friends with type 1 diabetes. And so, there's some amazing people in the community. And since then, I've grown to just have, some of my closest friends that are now like family, and those people all have diabetes.
So within fighting, it's not as known, especially in Taekwondo. What would be something that you'd like to tell someone about Taekwondo?
Oh, that's a hard question. Let's see. So, I guess one important one, and I get this quite a bit. So I competed at the World Championships, and I competed in ITF Taekwondo. So that's International Taekwondo Federation. But the Olympic style of Taekwondo is the World Taekwondo Federation. So actually there's two different styles, and those are based on North and South Korea. So actually ITF Taekwondo, which is the style that I trained, is from North Korea. So people find that pretty shocking. I actually qualified for the World Championships in North Korea, which was one of my biggest accomplishments. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go because I tore my ACL right before the competition. But that was a really cool story to kind of hear all of my friends that were competing for Team Canada as well, to get let into a country like North Korea and be able to experience kind of their culture and how big Taekwondo is for them there. That was like really fascinating for me. I wish I got to go, and that's one thing I'll always kind of regret. But we have to live with injuries sometimes, and that's the reality of sport. So that's kind of one of my biggest things, I guess, the two different types of Taekwondo that most people don't know about.
So how did you get involved within the research field?
I got involved in research in my undergrad, actually. I was doing kinesiology in my undergrad, and I was really interested in sports and athletics. As you can tell, since I was a little kid, I did sports growing up. And when I started kind of doing my undergrad, I realized I don't know anything about research. So I volunteered in a lab. And that was in a lab that does thermal physiology. So we were doing a lot of really crazy research. We had a chamber where we got to do altitude training and, change the temperature and climate inside a chamber. And one thing I started thinking about was wow, I wonder how my body as someone with diabetes would react to all of these stressors, that we are doing in all of these controls in people without diabetes. And realized my supervisor at that time, I was just volunteering, but I ended up working there over the summer as a research assistant, and that kind of got me sparked in, what happens to the body with diabetes in these kind of situations, altitude and heat and stress, and realized at that time there was actually very little, if any, research that was done on specifically type 1 diabetes in this area. So I guess there's a two-part component. So that's the first part. And then the second part was also in a similar time, because it was right around, university, competing at such a high level with Taekwondo. I was having a lot of hospitalizations, not a lot, but I was getting hospitalized for hypoglycemia, and it was happening more often than it should have. I can count on one hand how many times it happened to me, but that in itself is very scary, not only for myself, but for my family. And when I was living away at university and not understanding kind of the effects of nocturnal or late onset hypoglycemia was really scary for me. I thought to myself, kind of selfishly, if I'm dealing with this, how can I help myself? And in doing that, hopefully I can help other people understand, what the challenges are and how to avoid this, because I can't be the only athlete here with type 1 diabetes. And so it was all during that time that I kind of got really invested in research.
That's great. And that's why I got involved in diabetes research as well. Is I was just so fascinated about it, and certain aspects were happening to me, and how can I help myself, but also in a broader spectrum of helping other people. So it's a very altruistic behavior, a little bit selfish, but I think it's
right.
The best part. So with that too, in a lowdown, what is it like studying diabetes and exercise while being an athlete with diabetes?
Well, I think, diabetes itself is 24/7. We can't shut it off. We can't stop thinking about it. So that's already exhausting on its own. So I am so blessed to have some of my closest friends in the diabetes field. And so I just feel like everything around me is diabetes. I sleep, breathe, eat, everything that I do, I have to think about diabetes. I research it, I educate on it, I live with it. All my friends have it. So it's kind of always around me. And there's a lot of great that comes from it, but at the same time, we can't negate the fact that it's always there, and it's kind of exhausting at times. You really don't get a chance to shut off. But I think in the broader spectrum, it's been the most positive thing in my life, because I've met some of my closest friends that I'm really close with because of diabetes.
Absolutely, and you kind of get it's not a 9 to 5, it is a 24/7. And going back to why you get into research is you need to keep doing it, because like if you don't, no one is, and you need to like better the lives, and like it's almost like this pressure too. So that's so great. So with that, you have done your bachelor's, you've done your master's, you've done your PhD, and now you're doing a postdoc, which is that's a lot of education.
That's a lot of school.
It's a lot of school. It's a lot of diabetes research. So, in like small amounts, what did you study throughout your career, and what are you studying right now?
Oh, I don't even want to think back to that many years ago. I've done a lot of research, but I've done a lot of really fun studies. You know, for me, it's always about kind of enjoyment. I need to be passionate about what I do. So none of it's really been a burden. It's all been really enjoyable and kind of, you know, sometimes we get amazing results and sometimes you don't get the results that you're hoping for, but that's kind of the part of research that I love. You know, you're always learning on how to make things better and how to improve your studies and help other people. So in my bachelor's, I studied kinesiology, and then I moved on to specializing in type 1 diabetes and exercise. So I worked with Dr. Mike Riddell, one of the leading researchers in type 1 diabetes and exercise metabolism. And most people know Mike really well, phenomenal researcher. And I am really grateful that he is one of my closest friends as well. So, you know, having my supervisor as such a good friend, we learn from each other all the time. So we always are bouncing ideas off of each other. What kind of studies can we do? You know, how can we test it on each other first to make sure that, you know, whatever the studies are going to be, how do we do it safely? And that's always been kind of like a fun aspect of research for us. We get to brainstorm these ideas together all the time. So studied kind of the effects of caffeine in my master's, and then, you know, was so passionate about diabetes and exercise research and realizing like how little we actually know and how much more there is to be done. That's not to put down any of the amazing research that's already been done. I just think that there's so much more that we need to do. And so I didn't want to step away from research. And so I started my PhD with Mike and got to continue working with him. So that was also really fascinating because I got to specialize even further on, you know, basal rate adjustments and insulin dose adjustments and how to make exercise safe for people with type 1 diabetes. And so that was kind of the focus of my PhD. And most of my work was in adults with type 1 diabetes.
So even with that, I always get so excited because there's specifically your research looking at basal reduction prior to exercise that is always being told, well, not always, but I have been seeing it in the clinic and I've been seeing it in other research. So that dissemination, what is it like to see your research being translated into a clinical application?
Well, I think it's a pretty awesome, you know, feeling to be able to say that the research that I've done is actually being implemented in day-to-day life for people with diabetes. Now, that being said, there are so many challenges and so many differences from one person to the next. So one of the difficulties of doing research is that what I do today and what I do tomorrow might not give me the same result. Now you add into the mix what I do and then what you do might give us totally different responses. So I think one of the biggest things about my research is that if we can apply it, we can't give an exact kind of number. This is exactly what you need to do, and it's going to work perfectly for everyone. So I'm really grateful that the research I've published, which is basically showing that for aerobic exercise, if you don't want to be eating carbohydrates to prevent hypoglycemia with kind of an hour's worth of exercise, that's aerobic, so kind of low intensity, longer duration, the kind of ideal is to be reducing your insulin ahead of time. And this is again for open loop or, you know, for pump patients to be reducing their insulin by 50 to 80%, 90 minutes before exercise. So with that being said, you know, getting people to actually try that and do it and realize that, you know, for one person, it might be 50%, but for the next person, it might be 80%. The reason why we have to do all this research and further understand kind of what the outcomes are is because every person is so different. So it's been really awesome to see that implemented. But at the same time, I think we have a lot of work to do because not everybody is following guidelines. And that's not at fault for the people that aren't doing it. And it's partially because of the education. You know, our studies aren't always making their way to clinic and to the doctors that need to hear it to be able to share it. That's kind of what our biggest challenge is with diabetes research. We need to make sure that everybody can get access to it and try to make it work for them. So as much as I'm grateful for how many people are implementing it, I know that there's a lot of people that we can still help.
What do you suspect or hypothesize that the future of diabetes and exercise is going to look like in the next 10 years?
The next 10 years. Well, what do I think diabetes will look like in 10 years? What do we always hear about? The cure is going to be in 10 years. So I'm going to say it because we hear it every single time we talk to someone that's doing diabetes research. When's the cure coming? I think kind of the story is always 10 years from now. And then in 10 years, we might hear 10 more years. But I don't want to put down, again, any research that's being done. I just think that there's a lot of things we need to figure out before we kind of get to that cure. But in the meantime, I do feel like the future of diabetes is going to be primarily based on the technological advancements that we have. So I think the future is going to hold a lot of, positivity in terms of closed loop control. I think that these closed loop systems that can automate your insulin are going to be fully automated. So with very little kind of user interaction, I don't think people are going to need to tell, the system when you're exercising or when you're eating. And hopefully these are going to become fully automated. There's a lot of work that's being done in this field. I think that's going to happen before 10 years, but I think there's, we're well on our way to getting there with some incredible research that's being done.
Thanks for tuning in to Dskate Presents Game Time, Episode 4 with Dessi Zaharieva. Our thanks for Dessi for stopping by. Be sure to follow Dessi on Twitter and Instagram, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Game Time for more sports and diabetes content. On behalf of the Dskate team, I'm Anissa Gamble. See you at the next puck drop for the next episode of Game Time. Cheers!